Well, good morning. Thank you, Jeff, for the nice introduction. I'm happy to be here again and share some of my knowledge and some of my industry knowledge with everybody in this panel this morning. I see some familiar names here, so I want to thank you for joining us again and joining the Boca Tech Talks. We've been very successful, and we're very happy to keep on being invited and coming back. And so I'm, without any further notice or any further spending or wasting your time, I'm going to dive into the presentation. Like Jeff mentioned, I'm a CDI educator as well, besides the fact that I work for LK and Associates as a product specialist and marketing director. And one of my main jobs as a CDI educator is to bring all the different courses that happen or are happening within our industry, the consumer electronics industry. And one of our main goals is to bring the different communities of architects, interior designers, and bring them all together so we can collaborate and we can create an amazing experience to the end user when they look for all these different aspects in a home or a residence or even commercial jobs nowadays to work seamlessly and to make sure that that we please them and that they're happy at the end. And and I think we're very proud at the end to see that everything comes to fruition and that it works the way it's supposed to work. So again, my main job is to bring all this education, to bring us all together, and hopefully we can collaborate further. Today's class is designing home theaters and media rooms, and home theaters is one of my passions. This is how and where I started in the industry, working for different projector manufacturers and also screen manufacturers. So it's one of those things that really gives me that passion level. I'm just going to go to the main objectives, and one of them is going to be explaining the difference between home theater and a media room. And I think for the most part, most of us know what the differences are, but we're just going to go ahead and review the principles and the basics of what the differences are. We're also going to identify the design principles for picture, sound, and everything else that involves designing a home theater and a media room. Also properly use the industry accepted vocabulary. I mean, there's a lot of words that we throw in there, and we want to make sure that we speak the same language when we are communicating with our architects and interior designer friends and also the end user. So we want to make sure that we can collaborate and that we're using the proper terms. And also to understand the requirements of each room and each setup and how to communicate those needs or and communicate that effectively to and with the end user. So what's the point and why are we doing this? And again, this is when all this passion comes in place, right? A great film, TV, or gaming experience is a thrill ride. And we want to escape, turn off the world, and step into the story. Most people, like I do, and I believe most of us can say, we love films. People love cinema, and we love the love stories. Gone with the Wind is one of my favorite movies. So, and it's a great cinematic if you guys ever have a chance to see it, especially on a big screen. But, it's just not only for films. There's even TV. And nowadays, with all the streaming services that we have, there's like different programs like Game of Thrones. We were all so hooked into it. And I mean, the cinematics were pretty impressive, except for those last episodes in the super dark scenes. Stranger Things, those are just really well-made blockbusters shows, and they generally captive and they go, and we can go off for hours and hours watching them because we really engage. And the other thing is, like, we don't have to go to a commercial theater to watch them. So there's also the major sporting events and gaming. All of them in a huge screen gives us that fantastic sound and that immersion that we feel like we're in that stadium. Cinema, TV, and gaming are great share experiences for friends. So it brings everybody together, the family, friends, even us couples to enjoy it. And we don't need to have good weather, right? Hey, here we're in Florida, so not all the time it's nice and sunny outside, and sometimes it's way too warm. So why not just enjoy a movie or enjoy a show or a sporting event in our theater? Think of the room as the experience delivery machine, right? Family life, especially when children are young, it makes it hard to go out to commercial theater because they just cannot focus. So this is a really good thing to keep in mind, and to have a good home theater or media room that can be a fantastic asset to help this and to keep them entertained. In a well-executed home theater or media room can improve, the home resale value. So that's another added value to it. Right now with the pandemic, I think we're seeing that we're investing more in our homes because we cannot go out on vacation, or we just don't feel comfortable yet going to a commercial theater. So imagine bringing those experiences into our homes and investing that into our properties. It's a great resale value. It's a great experience for you, for your family, for your friends. And I gotta say that today we're in the golden age of home theater. Picture performance, sound performance, and the whole experience is much better, I gotta say, than commercial theaters. The technology's there, and we have a lot of options and choices here. So you would say, so what's the difference? And like I said at the beginning, I think for the most part, we know what those differences are. So let's just review them. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat room, or we can wait until the end to have a nice open discussion. So home theater, it tends to be used for a single purpose. And the whole idea here is that we can duplicate the whole commercial theater feeling, but in a more intimate case. We go there to watch something, then usually means super dark room. Rows of seating are often found, but it's not really a requirement. There's no windows or blackout blinds, right? So it's like, let's just go to the movie theater pretty much. So what is what is a media room? A media room, and we often use the term multi-purpose room, is a mixed-use room where one of the main uses is good quality TV, movies, gaming, sports event. It could be the main sitting room or a playroom or den, or it could be in a kitchen, lounge, diner, where we can welcome all of our friends and family when they're in. It doesn't have to be dark. It could be just intimate, and we can have some dim lights, and like something more comfy in an open environment. And in here, we probably won't use the whole tier rows of seating. At the bar in the back is a popular way to create that second row of for occasional use. So let's start with like this is a perfect example of a home theater room. And like typically on a room like this, the performance goals are identical. And something like this is super hard to duplicate in a media room, because we need the balance of performance with the other jobs that the room has, while compromising as little as we can. So, when my team or myself or anybody designs a media room, we ask, okay, so there's always got to be a compromise. And this is one of those conversations that need to happen on an early stage with the end user, and explain, expectations, right? You set the expectations from the beginning. If we do a media room, let's look at the room. What is it? There's always going to be somehow of a compromise. The parameters are outlined in the CEDIA guidelines for audio and video performance, which incorporate different industry standards from the audio and video and cinema industries. This applies more for the home theater, but also there's standards for media rooms as well. So all these courses are taught to our CEDIA professionals like Jeff and Boca Tech, and they take these courses to heart. And that's why they are the experts when it comes to designing the proper room. So what makes the experience, right? And these are the main elements of a home theater or media room, regardless of which one we decide to go. Picture, sound, and of course, everything else. And that does not include the popcorn, by the way. It's just, I guess, it's just an imagey thing. So this is, like, let's talk about picture first here. And then when it comes to picture, and if we've seen through the years that we have gone through different aspect ratios, and right now that's something that has become, for years now, has become very popular to have theaters with different aspect ratios. But at the beginning, when all this started booming, probably in the 80s, we saw that the standard aspect ratio was 4:3. And that was what, a lot of the TV consoles were made out of, the 4:3 format. However, that doesn't mean that there weren't films recorded on this different aspects. As a matter of fact, a lot of the films back in the 30s and 40s were recorded on what we call CinemaScope or 2:3:5 aspect ratio. But, just to give you a travel through the years, we switched from 4:3 to 69. And then lately, not that, again, CinemaScope is new, it's been there forever. It's just become more popular. And, the 2:3:5, I think, in my opinion, brings you that immersive, like you feel like you are in that movie. So those are the three main aspect ratios. And one note to say here on CinemaScope, 2:3:5 used to be the number or the aspect that was the reference. Now a lot of movies are being recorded on a 2.40 aspect ratio. So, when it comes to talking to an end user and asking them, so what do you want to view in your home theater? And this applies more to the home theater, right? Because you're going to have that screen that is capable of having these different aspect ratios. And if they say, well, I love to watch films from all eras, I like to watch sports. So then right there, you know that you're going to possibly need what we call a multi-masking screen that is going to allow you to go from the 4:3 69 into the CinemaScope, now the 2.40, and switch from different aspect ratios depending on what you are watching. I mentioned before screens. So I mean, this is the one of the elements that are really important when we design a theater. And screens are more popular on the home theater, like I said before. Flat panels are more used on the media rooms. But like for instance, in this picture, we see that there's a TV and then there's a mechanical or what we call a drop-down screen coming in front of the TV, so it can give you that that flexibility in a way. There's different types of screen. We have what we call acoustically transparent screens, which allows you to put the speakers behind the screen, which is, like we see more again on home theater applications, but it could also be seen in a lot of the media rooms, especially if you have a bar under the TV and you still want to utilize that sound bar so the sound can travel through the screen. Drop-down screens, like I mentioned before, they're very useful to change the look and feel of the room. And again, in this room, you can see that example of the drop-down screen and having two displays. And then, just one thing to keep in mind, that both projectors and screen can be completely concealed in ceilings for mixed use and in different design-conscious spaces. So you ask, how big, right? How big can we go? But it also involves the different what we call the sweet spot and where you want to be seated, and it talks about the viewing angle. And if you see on this picture highlighted in yellow, you're gonna see what we call the sweet spot or the Goldilocks range, and that's between those yellow. That's where you want to be sitting when you have that home theater. That's what that end user, the client that really enjoys this, wants to be sitting for both viewing and a lot of the times for also the audio part of it. Now, between the red lines that you see in there, those are okay for secondary and occasional seats, like kids on the big bean bags during a party, or maybe the grown-ups on the bar stools at the back. So if we go too big, we can see the sides and it's not comfortable. But if we go too small, it's not immersive enough. So we want to make sure that all this gets considered, when designing a theater. We want to make sure that, we know and we can show the client how big the screen is going to be, and we can measure what that sweet spot is going to be, and just make them aware of those secondary seats. Nowadays, resolution and brightness is available when when we use the viewing angles. Like back in the days, we used to worry too much about resolution and being able to see those pixels. Now we don't have to because of the different resolutions available. But it's one of those things that we still want to make sure that the end user is aware of. The other thing is the sight lines. When we're sitting on a theater, the eyes should be close to the level within the center of the screen. So here in the back row, you're looking straight on The front row and the sofas are looking a little slightly up. Both are comfortable, but people on the sofa are probably like relaxing and so looking up a little bit, not ideal. But doing this way around also means that the back row doesn't need lifting up as much, right? So the back seat in this case has that center view. We also have to make sure that there's enough room above everybody's head when standing up, and that the heads don't block the projector beam. And yes, I've seen this before. So we want to make sure that that all this gets considered and that it gets estimated when designing theaters. And like tier home theaters must be designed with great care, like I said here. Here's an example I'm going to show you of a tier design theater. And it's, again, it's pretty much out of everybody's way. And, you don't see the heads, you're actually seeing the screen, which is what you want to. So here's where, when it comes to, I already used two terms, right? The sight and the viewing angles. So those are two of the terms that are very important. But brightness is another one. It's very important to have brightness. That affects our ability to distinguish the different colors, and it gives us the convincing experience. I'm sure all of us have done the travel to Best Buy, and and that brightness captures us. But we also being in that bar where that picture is washed out, and it kills the experience for us, right? So light is a very important aspect when designing a theater. And if we go larger, and we've heard this before when an end user says, well, I want that larger screen possible, but there's a lot of things to consider, right? We want to make sure that the room is capable of that it can handle the large screen, that we have the proper projector, and that we have all the conditioning to make sure that this brightness works properly. In media rooms, this is a little more challenging because we have ambient light, and we have a lot of, in the most cases, bright painting in the room. So that affects obviously the brightness of the projector or of the TV set or whatever you're using. So we need to compensate for that. Like if we're going to be using a screen on a multi-purpose room, we have projectors that are brighter, but also we have projection screen materials that can help with the ambient light, and it rejects it. So it can actually show you what you need to watch. And rejects that light that we don't really need. And alternatively, we can also control the ambient lights by using blackout blinds, and maybe a little bit of both. But I've seen in most cases, people don't want to give away, especially down here in Florida, they don't want to give away the brightness of the room. They just want to make sure that that they can still view it. Right? Darkness. So this is another term that we use, and this is what we talk about contrast. And the black performance is also just as important as the brightness, right? This gives us that definition and that depth when we're looking at pictures. Like we want to make sure that exists, because it's what's gonna allow us to immerse ourselves into the pictures. And now with TVs and the different OLED technology, it actually gives us a sample of what true blacks should look like. Although when we talk about projection, there's really no true black. It's just the absence of bright. But I'm getting a little nerdy on the different terms. But darkness is very important, or contrast ratio, like I mentioned before. Now resolution. This is the war now, right? How many dots are in the picture? And like I mentioned earlier, maybe a few years ago, we were worried about where that first seat had to be, because a lot of you can actually view the pixels or the dots on the screen. Well, that's really kind of like a thing of the past with 4K, because the dots or the pixels are almost like really hard to spot. And now just one thing before I jump into the next one, like commercial theaters, this is what they use. They've been using 4K technology for many years. And then, for 8K, as we see here, is on the way. So it's just a reality is happening. Of course, the technology right now is very expensive. The chipsets are expensive to be brought into projectors right now, but it's a reality that is going to happen. There's possibly, there's very few content on 8K that is true 8K. But again, it's a technology that, we're going to see here happening. And, again, resolution, it used to be an issue. especially for the viewing angle. But I mean, it's something that still needs to be considered and make sure that that the designers of this theater keep it in consideration, and they do. Then, like it's going to be hard to spot here, but the whole idea on this picture is to talk about source quality, and we talk a lot about compression, and it's kind of hard to say if there's really nothing being compressed nowadays when it comes to video and also audio. A system using less compression has richer, more beautiful colors, fewer visible artifacts. And video compression works exactly like the video compression on a website in the way it looks on your phone. So if you have a picture and you look it on the phone, it looks acceptable. But then you go to your computer or a bigger screen, you're like, whoa, what happened there, right? So, like this is the whole idea on this slide to talk about compression. Streaming and broadcast services need more compression. Disk and server systems are much less compressed. And, like servers are very popular in disks on rural or marine projects where the internet speeds may be very poor or non-existent. Especially on the marine world, we see in a lot of like yachts and theaters in a yacht, like they do have their dedicated server for movies. Because of this streaming is for the connection is very poor. It's actually non-existent, right? And servers have the convenience of streaming with the quality of a dedicated disc player. But this service, they come with a price tag too. And it's a day and date system with extremely like strong copy protection. But it's a really nice way to go if you want to watch really good quality picture quality. Calibration. This a lot of the times is underestimated. And the calibration will give us that color accuracy. Out of the box, displays will not give you that best performance. I mean, you go to Best Buy, you look at that display, wow, those greens look so awesome on that football field, right? Then you bring it home and you're like, whoa, what happened here, right? Now I'm watching my movie and everything looks off. These presets are often set to look impressive in a bright retail environment, but not the room that is going to. And again, this Best Buy example, and not to say that they're in shame. I mean, it's just any retail store. That's just the way it works. And colors may be overly saturated, and the overall balance is usually off towards the blue. That's one thing that we tend to see. We also need to make sure that the picture is tracking evenly from black to white or the white to black. Otherwise, we could lose the detail in the dark areas and risk the fact that it could be a washed out picture. Professional calibration here is a key element of any home theater and media room installation. You need specialist measuring equipment and software, and just a good eye and test patterns. I mean, this calibrators, they go into like really deep training, and they invest a lot of money on this software and equipment to make sure that the picture is properly calibrated. So that's a very important part of when we design, not only design, but when we start implementing the best picture quality possible. But again, on the design part of it, it needs to be put in consideration, and it needs to be added to that budget. That calibration is a key component when it comes to video and also sound as well. So having said sound, we're gonna jump into the second element of designing home theaters and media rooms. And a lot of the filmmakers use sound to manipulate the audience and create that emotional response, right? How many times we're watching a scene and then we're seeing like, oh, like the music is what's moving us, most of the time. So, what is the reference? So in this auditorium that we're seeing here, which is part of the Galaxy Studios in Belgium, is one of the best dubbing stages or, pre-recording engineering settings in the world. Others include the Skywalker Sound Cinema in California as well. Here, the movie soundtracks are mixed, and they're signed off by the director and the sound team. It's a great collaboration, and it makes an ideal reference point for home theater designs. And again, this is our reference point. And what you're seeing there is a screen that is a reference as well, but the sound, I mean, everything is just amazing, and this is where it comes to fruition. And then, like everybody listens to orchestra when watching movies, right? Orchestras are very effective at triggering emotion. A lot of filmmakers and directors, they use orchestra to make us feel certain ways and to support the story. I mean, think about Star Wars, Superman, Indiana Jones, and other firms use orchestra more subtly. Reproducing the scale and detail of an orchestra is really a challenge, and it has to be very accurate. But again, this is what moves us when we're watching and we're immersing ourselves into a movie. And there's also more orchestra music that is effective and less common. Think about the Matrix soundtrack or Tron Legacy or anything Tarantino. Actually, like it gives us that that edge to feel like we're in this action movie. So one of those elements when it comes to duplicating music properly is the dynamics. Film tracks are highly dynamic, and that is that the quiet bits are really quiet and the loud bits are very loud. That's different to regular TV and radio, where everything is kept at the same level because it's compressed. The large dynamic changes are another trick filmmakers use to mess with our heads and to make us jump when something major or unexpected happens. I do that all the time. It means playing films properly. It's difficult engineering job, and it needs the right equipment. We want to make sure that those whispers and low voices are audible and distinct. But when the screen comes and the explosion and all the different orchestral crescendos, they have to be clear and clean. It just cannot be a noise like if your subwoofer or something exploded. It needs to be intended, and it needs to make you feel like like you're part of that action. So how loud? How loud does it need to be? And this is another term, SPL. SPL is how this sound level is measured. And SPL stands for sound pressure level. And it's measured in units of decibels or dBs. And it's a useful term when working with the specialist. So you're gonna hear this word out there. And like you might be thinking, but what about watts? But watts is only half of the story here. It's like horsepower when it comes to cars. It tells us the power, but not the weight of the car. So we don't know how fast the car can go. So it's one of those equation things. So for larger spaces, the engineering is extremely difficult, and also it could be very costly because it goes up enormously. There is much more air to move. And, like we have to keep in consideration the distance from the speaker to the listener. And, there's a lot of math that happens when it comes to designing an audio room, just like it happens on the video part of it. It also means that the equipment designed for a normal front room cannot and will not perform as well as in a large space. And then one of the differences here between a home theater and a media room is that for home theaters, we aim to have and achieve the audio reference level, right? Which is what we talked about, those studios in those dubbing rooms. But in a media room, we can actually set the bar a little lower. And a really effective way to improve the audio performance on a home theater or also a media room is to make it quieter, right? Reduce the ambient noise that makes everything more, and to make it more impactful. So, again, just reducing that extra noise that we don't need. So surround. And this has changed. Again, it's one of those things that has changed through the years. Historically, we went from silent to mono, then stereo, and it just keeps on getting much and much better. And recently, it has become 3D with a high dimension, right? And picture in this, you can see there's speakers above in this layout, so you can actually see the 3 front channels. In most rooms, you see 4 to 6 surround and 4 or 6 on the overhead. With most speakers, it becomes harder to tell where each speaker is, and the effect is totally more convincing. Are we okay? Okay, keep on going.
Yeah, we're fine.
Okay, so the system places audio events in 3D space, and it also reproduces the ambient of the different spaces, right? Imagine a spaceship flying right over your head or a fly buzzing around you. It makes you feel, it just helps with that immersive experience. So one thing that we like to say here when it comes to surround and sound is that we have to plan for extra speakers now, because again, this is just going to keep on getting better. And just make sure that we have enough cable routes open so we can update the rooms over time. Bass. This is, one of those things that a lot of people, and it's one of those needed facts, right, on a home theater. In a subwoofer, I gotta tell you, placement is extremely difficult. It's an engineering exercise. And the goal here is an even, deep bass performance for all listeners, for all of them. And a single sub will always result in a very lumpy and uneven bass, too much here, too little here and there. So the key principles, subs must be placed in pairs and with symmetry. So your home theater designer will take it from there. Again, that's one of the key features when our experts design theaters. And I'm sure Jeff can tell you stories later on as to how crucial this is. So when building a room, and this is a class that I taught a few weeks ago, and he talked about sound isolation. We have to keep the sound in and out, right? We want to make sure that the sound we want to listen to in that room stays in, and whatever is outside creates the kids screaming or the lawnmower, that needs to be out. So sound isolation is achieved with high mask, thick dense walls. We talked about this, multiple layers, sealed doors and windows are very important. Absorptive compounds between building the wall and floor layers, so we can soak up those low frequencies. And if you remember, low frequencies are super hard to manage. The same engineering principles that are used in recording studios, they also apply here, room within a room. And you remember Jeff showing us last time on this class on the sound isolation, like he has built this room within a room, and they're very effective. You also using different building materials that have different STC codes, the sound transmission coefficients, that's important when building these rooms. Also, the room should be kept airtight to prevent any sound leakage. We talked about, the lights, the air vents, all that needs to be completely airtight. The AC, the heating, cooling, and ventilation systems, the ducts, all that needs to be taken care of to make sure that we don't have any external noise, that we don't have any noise traveling from an adjacent room to the other through the AC vents, and vice versa. One story that I gotta tell here, my old house, it was a 2-story home, and my husband, he loves his hip hop music, and he was with his best friend and hanging out, and I was already in bed. And oh my God, that floor was in. And they were not, blasting the music, but I could hear that vibration, and it's so annoying, right? When you're trying to go to sleep. So this is a very important, sound isolation is a very important component when designing these rooms. And the benefits of isolating the room are twofold. The outside world does not affect the performance, and the film does not disturb anybody else outside. We've gone to also acoustic treatments, and there are different surface materials that can affect sound. And sometimes we sing in the shower because our voices sound much better because they're reflecting in the tile, and then here we are thinking that we're Adele. But that's just not the reality. We have a lot of reflective surfaces like glass, stone, and tiles, but thick carpets and soft furnishing are also absorptive. So for a convincing performance, we should always treat the rooms with acoustics. But we gotta be careful not to push too much of the treatment, because then it gives you like a dead sounding space, which will sound odd and it will feel completely unnatural. And that's also a key component, not only for home theater, but for a media room. We have to be very careful in a media room because it needs to be more lively when we're designing the acoustic treatments here. Versus the dedicated room, because we want to make sure that it feels right when people are chatting, because again, they're multi-purpose rooms, so we don't want them to sound like super dead silent. We want to make sure to have that dynamic sound. In a home theater, we can use different panels or fabric on the walls. Like I said, on the media room is a little more challenging. So that we use, that we make sure. And then here in this picture, we can see like some of the beautiful panels that are being used in this room. We're switching to, another key component, or another technique you want to use is camouflage, which is often used, especially in home theaters. I mean, you can have 17 speakers and 4 subs in a home theater room, but you don't want to see them. I certainly wouldn't want to. So there's plenty of choices. We can go in wall, we can go on wall, we can go in the ceiling, and we can go inside a cabinet, right? We can color match and have different art options that can match our decor in the room. And, there's a lot of camouflaging options as well. Like on the first picture here, we see plaster over speaker. And they're, what we call invisible speakers. And, like they're perfect for design critical media rooms, and they sound amazing. We also see on the picture on the right, we see an LCR bar speaker, left, center, right, and that can be combined in a cabinet. So, and again, that's mostly used for media rooms. And then we also see behind screens. So for this, we need to have an acoustically transparent screens. If you don't want to have those front speakers shown, you can have them behind the screen. And also you can hide the speakers behind some fabric and hide everything in there. And there's a lot of designs, but you got to keep in mind that this fabric must be acoustically transparent as well, just like the screens would be. So everything else but popcorn, right? So one thing to keep in mind is the location. So where should you set a home theater? And we've seen a little bit of everything, but typically, that's one of the things that that discussion needs to happen with the end user, or maybe before you start even designing. Near the kitchen, it's typically it's very popular because everything is so close by and for snacking and drinks. Near a bathroom and quiet near the front door so your guests come in and out. And obviously away from the bedrooms. You don't want to be like me that night, staying up all night, although the whole idea is to isolate the noise. But, we want to make sure that it's away from the bedrooms. And be careful with sound energy on the upper floors, like I said before, because, if it's a serious home theater, it's hard to avoid some rattling at times. Basements are good. We need to be careful because of the ceiling height. And if you're using theater seating, we want to make sure that, we're not hitting that limitation that we have. So that's some of the examples. Also, if you're working on MDUs, we see them typically alongside the gym. So that's one of the locations. Another thing is the space planning, and this is very important for ventilation, for cooling, expandability, maintenance, and for that system to be able to be serviced. Also for the noise level, we want to make sure that, it is accessible for media as well. And that the equipment needs to be on a space with a lot of, like I said before, ventilation. Typically, we see a separate projection room or an equipment room that prevents the equipment noise in the theater. A lot of the projectors, especially if you start getting on the larger scale, they tend to be a little loud because of their fans. So we want to make sure that, the projector is placed in a separate room. And then it gives you that whole real cinema feel, right, as well. Also, you might want to have other technology room, not only for the equipment, for the projector and all that, but, for your lighting, climate control, the multi-room music and video, for your Wi-Fi and networking, for your cameras, and so on. So, it's very important that we plan for these rooms as well. So to be a little, adjacent to the home theater, if it's a dedicated theater or a media room, so we can have easy access, that it has properly ventilation for everything else. Seating, it's another component. I mean, and like I said at the beginning, it's just not a must that you have to do seating, but it, again, gives you that feeling of a real home theater when designing dedicated theaters, right? They're optional, but the space feels, you can make the space feel less formal. So there are different design nowadays when it comes to theater seating. that can make it look more, not that commercial feel like. So, a lot of the luxury homes, they prefer to have the seats that incline or recline. They have different cup holders with USB charging, which is a must now. So our phones are charged at all times. And even seats can have some move. We've seen this often on gaming rooms, right? And they move with the motions of the gaming. So they're very effective as well. And this seats can also be placed on your media rooms, not only on your dedicated theaters. Lighting. It's let's see, my slide is not changing. Lighting is another key component when it comes to it. Great lighting, it is really effective for creating the overall feel. The dimmable, controllable lights are a must when it comes to home theater and even media rooms. You might want to have low lights so the children don't get scared and people can come and go if they need to, for safety. And also you can have LED strips that can be used for effect on the walls or ceilings, or even around the screen. So lighting is like a very important component. This is an example of a home theater design, very, very popular design called the Death Star. But it's you can also use, lighting is a must for both dedicated theaters or media rooms. And then style, this is where we fully depend on your expertise here, right? Anything goes. Once you pick a theme or, with your end user, we follow the performance rules with our CDI expert, and then we can finally be a little bit creative and have a lot of fun and turn the world off, and give the experience that we want to. This is where we fully depend on you, because this is where the magic happens, like they said. And you can create a contemporary theater, vintage or retro. We've seen many beautiful designs in our industry, and it's breathtaking. Value. The products that we specify, they share key attributes. Most of them are built to last for years with long warranties, and they're serviceable rather than replaceable. And this is something we see more when it comes to like really high-end theaters, which is the very opposite culture of throwaway, often associated with tech and consumer IT products. A good home theater or media room design should be planned with servicing and updates in mind. The initial investment obviously is higher, but the performance level is phenomenal. And so this is one of the things that we need to keep in mind, like that we specify value products because this is what's going to make the experience work. And again, this is when you depend on those CDI experts to advise on which products those are, and there's a huge variety when it comes to it. This is everybody's nightmares, controls. And like we want to make sure that everything is just simple these days. A home theater or media room system is complicated. It has a lot of components. Like I said before, you have a TV, you have a projector, you have a screen, especially if it's motorized. Now you're looking into a different system. You have lighting. So that, so many options here, right? So the display system, sound system, all that, it needs to, it's hard to juggle. Too many remotes or devices or apps nowadays, right? So we must have a control system that can turn everything on. Close the blinds if we need to, maybe dim the lights, and decide which input we want to use. Do we want to watch cable TV? Do we want to watch a movie? Or maybe change to ESPN? With one command. And all, again, this needs to be thought of from the beginning. Control apps are a good backup, but a handset is much better. Lighting should always be accessible from the control. And I know like this is a trend that we all use, and that's the voice control, but we have to be careful. It's kind of cool to turn off your home theater system with Alexa or Siri, but you're gonna struggle during the loud sections if you need a break or if you want to change the volume. So imagine sometimes I get into fights with Alexa to turn the volume down, and she just doesn't get me. So imagine if you're in a theater and you need to take a break or anything like that. So just be careful. So again, a centralized handset is important. You can also have a panel or a screen by the door. It's always useful, but the handset is definitely a must when it comes to controlling your systems. So you may say, okay, do we have some design constraints? Yes, there's always, there's challenges when designing either a home theater room or a media room. But, typically we see more of these constraints when it comes to media rooms. But, the most important thing is like, again, we sit and we set the expectations with the client, that we talked about it. But, our technology, and if you guys haven't yet, there's a course called Hidden Technologies. We have a lot of products that allows us to hide a lot of this technology so it's not visible, especially if you're using it on a media room. So, obviously the smaller the room, the better it is, but it also gives us a lot of challenges, like where is the projector gonna go, right? So, there's technologies where you can hide the projector on the ceiling. You can have the screen disappear into a pelmet, and make it blend with our decoration. And there's extra seats, a bar. There's different options when it comes to designing a proper room that can be also seen. It can be a beautiful design as well. So how can we help, right? There's a lot to consider. There's just a lot of information to process. But, the design, let's talk about it. We offer training and certifications aimed at helping members design technically sound spaces. This have to be achieved by certification that demonstrate the understanding of the principles. So this is a key component. Documentation, number two. We're used to working with design professionals and creating good, clear drawings for buildings and for any system. But our CDM members can totally get you these drawings and documents so you can produce the proper package to the client. Installation, number three, our specialist engineers, and they're super experienced and trained. They ensure a seamless installation. Make sure that you look when you're hiring a CDI expert that they have the CDI ESCT, which stands for Electronic Systems Certified, for both technician and networking specialist certifications. Those are something that, a true, like one of our trained specialists must have. And aftercare, we want to make sure that we have an ongoing relationship with the client. We want to maintain and keep things up to date. So it's important that, that we have this. And, I was happy like a few weeks ago when we had that open panel, and Jeff had one of his clients there. And it was like such a great experience to be able to have those conversations with end users. Typically, my position, I deal more with the professionals, but having, knowing that you guys are so well connected and that you can have those dialogues with the end user and inform them as to what's up to date and what needs to be upgraded, not because it's not working, but because, there's so many great technologies, and, we just want to make sure that the experience is a pleasure for them. So just to recap really quick, we talked about the differences between home theater and a media room, right? Home theater is more dedicated. A media room is your multi-purpose room. We identified the design principles for picture, sound, and everything else. We talked about the different vocabularies, like we talked about the dynamic range when it comes to sound. We talked about brightness when it came to projection and darkness or contrast. We talked about the different engineering rooms in which both systems are tested, so we have a reference especially for when it comes to home theaters or dedicated rooms. And we also talk about the different requirements of each room and setup, and also how to communicate these needs to the clients. So with that, I am going to open up and see if you guys have any questions, any comments.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. That was great as usual. I learned a few tips from your PowerPoint slides and made some notes here to spur the conversation. Looks like we've got about 6 minutes left here. There are three questions I get a lot from clients and other professionals, and the first one is projection going away? And I would say emphatically no. The largest practically priced um, flat screen display these days is 100-inch. And those are extremely expensive. Sony and Samsung both have theirs out there. They retail for $60,000. I'm telling you, for $60,000, you can get a really nice projector and a really nice screen, a lot larger than 100-inch, and you can get them to the second story in the house or in a condo because the projector is fairly small, relatively speaking, and you take a screen and it rolls up and you put it on the wall when you get there. So I don't see projection going anywhere soon. Um, Also, in terms of aspect ratios, the widescreen or CinemaScope aspect ratio 235, 240, as you had mentioned, we don't see that in flat screen TVs either. So for the real cinematic experience with letterbox widescreen formats, you would be going to projection. Typical projections far exceed 100-inch. The one that we have here is 160. We've done up to 250. I've seen them larger than that, but I would say somewhere in that 120 to 150 would be a pretty good sweet spot, which you're not going to get in a flat screen. Home resale is the second thing that comes up. True story, last week, client of mine built a theater with us 6 years ago in the Bridges and is selling her home and downsizing to another Bridges home, actually. And what sold her house was a dedicated theater room. She also had a media room in the family room off the kitchen with, believe it or not, a 100-inch TV and a 5.1 surround sound. I mean, really. And that's her for sports. But that dedicated media room was the seller, and it differentiated her home from other homes. And I don't know if it's the COVID effect or whatever, but having a room where either kids or adults could go in, shut the door, and it's far enough away from the rest of the house that it's not that everyone in the entire house doesn't hear everything was a big deal. And yeah, it did have more purpose-built seating and projection. It wasn't really an over-the-top theater by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a seller, and it was only a 1080p. It wasn't 4K. It didn't have Dolby Atmos. Didn't have any of those other things. But most buyers coming in had never seen anything like that in a home, and it really set it apart. And the house sold with multiple offers in days.
Wow.
So yeah, I think that's a really, really big point here in terms of resale and a dedicated room. Price ranges is the third question. What's it cost to do one of these things? Well, with a dedicated media room, I think we all know what a regular old media room is: family rooms, couches, off the kitchen, whatever. But for a theater, we're usually talking about doing the entire room, floor to ceiling, including carpeting and seating, acoustic panels, and now we get to the AV, which would, you know, which would include the audio and the video. Um, I would say $75,000 is a modest, dedicated theater, and I know that's a big number, but 100 grand is probably more realistic when you're talking about 8 seats. I mean, you could spend a couple $1,000s per chair, and we haven't even talked about a projector yet. So I usually steer people. I try and figure out, how serious they are about this. But 75 to 150 is a pretty good range. 150 is really getting to the high end. Obviously, we've gone higher end than that. We've really just bigger rooms at that point. But I don't think you can do a proper dedicated theater that is a lot different than what you would do in a family room, um, for less than 75, unless you've already got seating and you've already got the decor and you're really just buying electronics. Well, sure, then you can do that. I'm just talking about the whole package. As far as what differentiates a theater in my mind from a media room, it's it's the fact that we're probably doing immersive audio. You mentioned this briefly. Immersive audio is the new format that incorporates ceiling speakers, and I'm talking about a height layer. I've seen a lot of media rooms where they put the speakers that really should be down on the sides and in the rears, they put them in the ceiling. Why? Because there's no walls, right? If I go into a family room, um, I actually dialed the phone because I was going like this. It was cold. My watch dialed. But if you're going into a family room, you may not have walls because there's big glass windows and there's a kitchen and there's really no place to put them. So you have to compromise and put your surround layer and your sometimes your audio layer. You end up putting them in the ceiling. In a media room, you wouldn't make that level of compromise. You would put the sides and rears in the walls, and you
Mm-hmm.
dedicate the ceiling for your height layer. The other thing that you can do, because the larger the flat screens get, now you can't, no speaker's going to play through a TV, but they can play through a screen. You mentioned acoustically transparent screens. We used to call them perforated screens back in the day. But lining up three speakers left, center, right behind the screen and playing through it means that now you get perfect sight lines as well as audio sight lines because you're aligning the speakers with the seating positions and not with, oh, it's got to be to the left and right of this flat screen, which is what you're doing in a family room or a multi-purpose room. So I think you have more speakers in a theater, right? The at least four more for the Dolby height layer, Dolby Atmos height layer. Sides, rears, and fronts are down lower. You may do two sets of sides if there's two rows of seating, where in a typical family room, you're probably only doing one set. And then you've got the aspect ratio thing. One other thing, so those are three top questions. One other thing I would say is design the room for rattles, for lack thereof, right? I've seen a lot of form over function kinds of theaters where they look really good and the sconces are great. And they got glass and other things, and as soon as the bass or the subwoofer comes on, they rattle and they sound horrible. And people think it's the speakers are breaking or whatever, and then we'll sweep the room by sending a test tone that kind of like goes between the really low frequencies, and you'll immediately start hearing things light up and rattle. So be very, very careful with your choice um, of sconces, with your choice of shelving and other knickknacks, so that they're not rattling on you. Ductwork has been a big problem for us. Those the cheaper the cheaper ones that have the movable vents, they tend to light up and rattle on bass, and it wouldn't be consistent. It would be like certain notes. If you're watching a movie and you hear something, and then you get a phone call and like, hey, my speaker's blowing up on me. No, it turns out it's the air conditioning vent. Um, I'll also make a comment on drywall speakers, um, not for a dedicated theater. They are amazing compared to what they were a few years ago, and I think they're great. We have them in the showroom. I wouldn't design a proper like high SPL level dedicated theater using drywall speakers because I don't think they put out the SPLs that you would need to hit the reference levels. So if that would be one where you're making a compromise for form over function, and in a dedicated room, you're typically compromising the other way of function over form. Um, One last thing I'm going to do is bring up a picture of a really cool installation um, that hopefully will inspire you to what people are doing with what they call a warp engine. Um, This is a very interesting multi-purpose room here. And the traditional thinking is that you have to hang a projector from the ceiling like an upside down lollipop. Nobody likes that. In a theater, you can get away with it, but in a multi-function room, not so much. And then what's the problem with that other than the fact that you've got an ugly, loud projector is any hanging light fixture, any chandelier, any ceiling fan or whatever is going to be right in the way of the projector. It's not going to work for you. In this installation, this particular product line called Barco has something called a warp engine, where the projector is actually shining out in the corner, and the screen drops down and it's shining sideways. You can actually do this correction with a properly designed location for both. It's the vent there for ventilation as well as light, and it's actually shooting sideways. So that's what the projector and the ventilation system looked like with the cabinet door off. And I think there's a better 3D view of this there. That's you see how it's kind of coming sideways like that. Still achieving CinemaScope widescreen. It's bypassing that hanging light. And now we have a dual purpose room that can be both a media room and a dedicated proper theater room with really not a lot of compromises. So it's just something clever that I thought would be for this crowd. You might appreciate that you can really actually have a pretty good looking multi-purpose room without a lot of compromises, and you don't have to have a hanging projector anymore. There are other techniques, rear projection, things like that. But I think the design crowd, that's what excites me the most about these ASID talks, is amazing what interior designers and architects and AV guys could do when we all work together. We can come up with something that none of us could do on our own. So with that, we're about 5 minutes over. I don't know if there's any other questions. If not, we could say goodbye till next week. I'll give it a second here. Okay, it looks like we're getting the goodbyes here. Well, all right. Well, then I guess I'll wrap up. Thank you again, Vanessa. I appreciate your time as always.
Thank
And thanks
you.
everyone for joining. And I look forward to seeing you next week.